Part 95. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 942. When mentioning Princess Anyang, Tang Ning thought that she seemed to have misunderstood something before. Mobile phone. Before he left the capital, he handed over the Tang family's business to Princess Anyang and promised her a huge profit. She thought Tang Ning was targeting her. But it was really a misunderstanding. Tang Ning would not have any bad thoughts about her just because she was easy to give birth to. The matter of the western regions was settled, and his biggest concern was settled. After stabilizing the western regions, he returned to Kizhu and had a lot of children with his wives. He looked at Tang Yao Yao unhappily. You can guess blindly, don't drag the princess into it, she hasn't married yet. Tang Yao Yao put her hands on her hips and said dissatisfiedly, what do you mean? Do you mean that I am already married, and compared with the princess, I am already old and ugly? Women really don't like to reason. Tang Shui is like this, Tang Yao Yao is also like this. Tang Ning just said that Princess Anyang is not married yet, and she immediately thought of this. No, no, how can you be old and ugly? Tang Ning immediately smiled and said, in my eyes, you will always be so young and beautiful. There are many wives in the family, and Tang Ning has long realized that women need to be coaxed. All the arrogance and jealousy are due to love. In this way, all her arrogance is cute in Tang Ning's eyes. Seeing Tang Yao Yao blushing, Tang Ning smiled and stretched out her hand, saying, let's go, concubine, go out of the palace to see our world. The situation is tense recently. Xiaoan has changed the king. The court of Xiaoan has not publicized it, and the people are still unaware of it. Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao walked hand in hand in Xiaoan city. It is obvious that the people of Xiaoan are very different from other countries in the western regions. Because of the situation, the people of other countries in the western regions are very nervous, but this kind of tension is not easy to see in Xiaoan city. Everyone was doing their own things without rushing or slowing down, not worrying about the war at all. The architectural style in Xiaoan city was also very similar to that of the capital. If it weren't for the faces they saw, which were very different from the Han people, some people would definitely think they had come to the capital. In Tang Ning's heart, he admired the ruler of Xiaoan very much, but he didn't expect that the ruler of Xiaoguanxiang was his father in this world. He had a lot of things to ask him, but they left in a hurry and didn't want to wait even a day. Even if Tang Ning had a lot of doubts in his heart, he could only wait until the next time they met to ask. Tang Ning estimated that the day they returned to Kizhu was not far away. Although the western regions were in chaos, the situation was clear. After more than a dozen small countries established the Western Regions Alliance, there were only 4 major forces in the western regions. Among them, Xiaoan, Wuzhen and Daiyou were mutually restrained, and the Western Regions Alliance was weak. When the outcome of the 3 countries was determined, the overall situation in the western regions was also determined. Daiyou City. Daiyou is an old and powerful country in the western regions. It once dominated the western regions and has been the absolute overlord of this land for 100 years. In recent years, with the rise of Xiaoan, Daiyou's position has been threatened, but they have joined forces with Wuzhen to deal with Xiaoan. After they destroy Xiaoan and annex Xiaoan, Daiyou's position will be consolidated again, and even stronger than ever before. Daiyou City is still as prosperous as ever. In the western regions, Daiyou City is second only to Xiaoan City in terms of scale and prosperity. The permanent population in the city is 200,000. Among them, the people of Daiyou occupy a part, and the other part is the slaves looted by conquering other countries. The state will requisition part of these slaves, and the other part will be sold to the citizens of Daiyou. These slaves can only be beaten and scolded by their masters, and can even be executed at will. Hurry up. Don't dawdle. Don't think about eating today if you don't finish the work. Under the western wall of Daiyou City, an armored city official, holding a long whip in his hand, whipped the slaves in front of him from time to time. These slaves came from Wensu State, which was originally a medium-sized country in the western regions with a population of nearly 10,000. It was annexed by Daewoo half a year ago. The victorious soldiers in the country were forced to join the battlefield, and the people in the country were classified as lowly official slaves by Daewoo. On weekdays, they could only get food to maintain their livelihood by working hard. The 10,000 troops sent by Daewoo were almost wiped out this time. They failed to attack the western region's allies and suffered a great loss. Although everyone expected that the western region's allies did not have the courage to attack Daewoo City, the court still planned to strengthen the city wall just in case, and those official slaves were forced to work. However, the Daewoo people, who were the upper class, did not treat them as human beings at all. They only had a bowl of porridge with few grains of rice every day, but they had to work from morning to night. Even the strongest men could not bear it after a few days. In these days, dozens of slaves died of starvation, exhaustion, and being beaten to death by supervisors. At this time, the city official held a whip and whipped them from time to time. After every sound of breaking wind, a purple blood mark was left on the back of one of them. "Sir, let us rest for a while. From morning till now, we have been working for 4 hours. If this continues, more people will die." The slaves dragged their exhausted bodies and begged the city official, but the city official sent to oversee the work was unmoved. He waved the whip faster and cursed angrily, "You beg me, I will go. Who are you begging for? You can't finish the work in 3 days. I am the one who is responsible. Stop talking nonsense and hurry up and do it for me. Get up an hour earlier tomorrow." The expressions on the faces of the slaves became even paler, but they did not dare to resist. They could only drag their hungry and tired bodies and continue to work hard. Their lives are nothing in the eyes of these Daewoo people. Resisting them will only lead to death. But if things continue like this, death will be a kind of relief for them. Wensu Kingdom has been destroyed by Daewoo, and soon they will follow the king. It was late at night, and these slaves returned to their homes dragging their tired and hungry bodies. Their houses are just thatched huts made of branches and thatch, which can barely provide shelter from the wind and rain. This is the case for most of the citizens of the countries that were conquered by the late night. A strong man returned to his thatched house and saw a person standing in the house. He immediately became nervous and shouted, "Who are you?" The man raised his head, looked at him, and said, "I am from the Western Allies, and I am here to rescue you." Hearing the words "allies of the Western regions," the strong man's expression changed. Even though he worked day and night, he heard some news about the allies of the Western regions from the mouths of those city officials. After Atsuki annexed the surrounding countries, big and small, he finally set his sights further afield. They sent envoys to the east, hoping to persuade those small countries to submit. Oyu's purpose was simple. Although the populations of those small countries were small, if they were piled on the battlefield, they could also serve as human shields for Oyu's elite soldiers. What no one expected was that those small countries with a small population actually violated Daewoo's orders and formed the so-called Western Region Allies. The leader of Daewoo was furious and sent an army of 10,000 to encircle and suppress the Western Region Allies, but almost all of them were defeated. The army was wiped out. The strong man thought of many things in his mind in an instant. He looked at the man and asked, "What do you want us to do? What benefits can you give us?" The man smiled and said, "I need you to cause chaos in Daewoo City and open the city gate. After that, we will restore your identity and help you re-establish Wensu Kingdom. If you are willing, you can also join our allies in the Western region." The strong man looked at him directly and asked in a deep voice, "You want to take action against Daewoo?" The man grinned and said, "They were the ones who started the attack." Lewin Mobile Version Website. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 943. Daeyo City, Imperial Palace. Mobile. The king of Daeyo listened to the reports of the people below, and his face became more and more gloomy. These days, he rarely heard good news about Daeyo. The establishment of the Western Region Alliance, the annihilation of Yushan and Gumo, made Daeyo's important layout fail, like a slap in the face. However, this is not the only bad news. The latest battle report from the battlefield made him even more irritated. After Daeyo and Wuzun united, although they did not get any benefits from Zioan, after several battles, both sides also lost and won. However, in the past half-month, they had several frictions with Zioan, and they were almost suppressed by the other side. Although the scale of those wars was not large, Zioan won easily with fewer people than them when the number of participants was far less than theirs. The battlefield gradually showed a decline, but on the one hand, Daeyo City had also become chaotic these days. Within half a month, 3 government warehouses were burned, and the arsonist has not been found yet. The guards patrolling the city at night also encountered several attacks, resulting in no people daring to go out after dark. The Lord of Daeyo frowned and said, "Send another 2,000 guards from the palace to patrol the city. If you encounter rioters, kill them without mercy." Joining forces with Wuzun to deal with Zioan, most of Daeyo's elite troops have been withdrawn. After the annihilation of Yushan and Gumo, only 5,000 soldiers can be mobilized in Daeyo City. Among them, 1,000 people are responsible for patrolling the city, and the other 4,000 are arranged in the palace, but now the chaos in the city is out of control, and he can only make temporary adjustments to the troops. However, he had just made these arrangements when another piece of news shocked him so much that he almost fell from his position. The Western Region allies assembled an army of 10,000 and had arrived 100 miles away from Daeyo City. It seemed that they were coming with bad intentions. "They are so bold," he showed shock and disbelief on his face. He never thought that the Western Region allies would dare to take advantage of the situation and attack Daeyo. When Daeyo was at its peak, they could destroy an army of 10,000 with a wave of their hands, but now the country is empty and the army outside is tied up by Zioan, unable to return to defend, and can only rely on the strength of the country. Fortunately, there are still 200,000 people in Daeyo City, and tens of thousands of young and strong people can be gathered at any time. In addition, there are countless slaves from other countries. It is a pipe dream to want to break through Daeyo City with only 10,000 people. Close the city gates and prepare for battle. Quick, gather those slaves immediately. Send out 50 spies to closely monitor the enemy's every move and report at any time. Although he did not think that these 10,000 people could threaten the safety of Daeyo, he still made the most thorough deployment and arrangements. Before today, he had never thought that those tiny countries would pose such a threat to Daeyo, and he couldn't help but feel a little regretful. However, regretful as it was, this emotion only appeared in his mind for a moment, and he focused on the matter at hand and ordered, "Call all the ministers immediately and go to the palace to discuss matters." The Western Region allies took advantage of the emptiness of Daeyo and targeted Daeyo, and did not hide it from the people of Daeyo. In just 3 days, they approached to Daeyo City 30 miles away. For a time, the atmosphere in the city suddenly became uneasy. Although the heart of the Daeyo court was also raised, it was still calm. It just closed the city gate and did not allow anyone to enter or leave. Apart from that, there was no extra action. Compared with the Western Region allies, their advantage is that they are the defending party. With only 10,000 people attacking the city, it is impossible to break through the city with 200,000 people. In Daeyo City, there is enough food to provide the people in the city for several years, and it only takes 1 month to drag down the 10,000 people outside. Even so, the defenders in the city did not relax. There were hundreds of people patrolling on the 4 walls day and night, and spies were sent out to watch the enemy camp day and night. A few days later, The army of the Western Region allies had advanced to 10 miles outside the West Gate. According to the report of the spies, their food could not last long, that is, within a few days, the enemy would attack the city. In the city, the Daio court had gathered more than 10,000 slaves. These slaves usually sold their labor in exchange for food to survive. When Daio city encountered a crisis, they were pushed out at the first time. These people were gathered together, and a Daio official stood on the high platform in the front and said loudly, "You all listen to me clearly. As long as you win this battle, the court will remove your slave status. This is your only chance." The defenders of Daio stood on the city wall, looking at the Western Region allies' army approaching the city, and their expressions were still calm. Daio has dominated the Western region for so long, and naturally has seen many battles of all sizes. In addition to these 10,000 slaves, Daio's young and strong men have also formed a team of more than 10,000 people. When these slaves rush out of the city, they will close the city gate. Even if the army of the Western region's allies is well trained, these slaves are not opponents, and will greatly weaken the opponent's strength. At that time, they will go out of the city to encircle and suppress, and they will be able to catch all the rebellious people of these small countries. However, no one expected that when they opened the city gate, half of the slaves rushed out of the city gate and stopped rushing forward. They seemed to have planned it, turned their bodies, and aimed their weapons at Daio's soldiers behind them. At this time, the city gate was wide open, and the entrance was full of crowded slaves. It was impossible to close the city gate. The Western Region allied army behind them took this opportunity to rush in and rushed into Daio city together with those slaves. The slaves' betrayal was something that the Daio people had never expected. Before they could react, they were killed by surprise. Several generals changed their faces and were about to give orders, but suddenly a strange old man or old woman appeared in front of them. After that, they went black and lost consciousness. The Daio army was leaderless. Facing an enemy twice their number, they were quickly defeated. The Western Region allied army and the slaves' coalition forces took advantage of the victory and soon surrounded the palace. Inside the palace, the king of Daio sat slumped on the throne, his face pale and bloodless, trembling. "How is this possible? How is this possible?" A guard leader stood beside him and said anxiously, "King, the soldiers will fight their way out of the east gate. Let's run away quickly. As long as the king is still here, we still have a chance. The elite of Daio are all outside. Once they get rid of Zioan's restraint, they can quickly fight back. This is their only hope. Today is a disaster for Daio. Foreign enemies invaded and slaves betrayed. Although the king escaped under the protection of some loyal guards, Daio city has completely fallen into the hands of the Western Region allies. The slaves of Daio city finally saw hope, cheered and jumped for joy, and were very excited. If it weren't for the people of the Western Region allies who had long ago told them not to massacre the people of Daio, today would be the day for them to bloodbath Daio. On the contrary, today is the end of the world for the people of Daio. They have lost their king and their guards. Although no one has taken advantage of the chaos to do anything to them now, no one knows what will happen tomorrow. Only a few hours later, news came out that the king of Daio, who had escaped 30 miles outside the city, was captured and imprisoned in the palace. So far, Daio, which was once glorious and annexed and slaughtered many countries, has also embarked on the same path as them. When Tang Ning received the intelligence from the front, it was already a month after they planned to attack Daio. With the help of Zioan, the spies of the Western Region's allies condensed the slaves in Daio city into a solid force, which turned against them at the critical moment and played a key role in helping them break through Daio city. The Daio army, which is still on the battlefield and deadlocked with Zioan, probably doesn't know yet that when they and Wuzun joined forces to deal with Zioan, Zioan had already joined forces with the Western Region's allies to cut off their firewood. I said some time ago that Xiaolang Jun would probably be finished by the end of the year, but when I was actually writing, I found that filling the holes at the end and developing the plot in the middle of the beginning were not the same writing method. I am not a person who will increase the number of words by watering the plot during this period. I deleted a lot of redundant things according to this writing method. The end should be 2 months earlier, as early as September and as late as October. I would like to inform everyone of this. In addition, although it is almost finished, I will still keep updating. After all, lying in bed with a broken bone is nothing to do. However, typing on a mobile phone is not as uncomfortable as typing on a computer. I always feel that the screen is small, the thinking is narrow, and the brain is a lot duller. If there are any omissions, I hope everyone will actively point them out in the comment area. It is not easy to chase a book to more than 2 million words. Let's finish the last part of Xiaolang Jun together. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 944. The Allies were able to capture Dayo City, and those slaves contributed a lot. Their country was destroyed, and they lived a life of slavery in the city of Dayo, with no clothes on their bodies and no food to eat. Overthrowing Dayo could restore their freedom and even rebuild the country, making them more powerful than others. The Allies in the western region are even more hopeful that this operation will succeed. This reflects the gap between Xiaoan and Dayo. Xiaoan has also annexed many countries, but the people of those countries enjoy the same treatment as the original people of Xiaoan in Xiaoan City. They also regard themselves as a member of Xiaoan, and even actively ask to join the army. In contrast, Dayo, but was ultimately destroyed in the hands of those who had already been conquered by him. Sometimes, even Tang Ning couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration in her heart when she thought of her father, whom she had only met twice. He rarely admires others because his knowledge far exceeds that of the ancients. In his eyes, many of their ideas are still at a very ignorant stage. In such an era, it is rare to have the thoughts of future generations thousands of years later. Taking Dayo City is not the only good news, there is also good news from Laozheng. In the past month, Xiaoan has not suffered a defeat, and the coalition forces of Dayo and Wuzhen are already a little unable to withstand them. It was already early October. If things went well, he could rush back to Guizhou before the end of the year to spend a good new year with them. Thinking about her parents who had disguised themselves as caravans and settled in Jiangnan, Tang Ning felt a little sad. They believed in her and were not afraid that he would mess up Xiaoan's future. Wuzhen City. The allied forces of Dayo and Wuzhen, using Wuzhen City as their stronghold, have been in a stalemate with Xiaoan's army for several months. From being evenly matched at the beginning, with occasional wins and losses, to now being defeated and defeated again and again, the morale among the coalition forces has been reduced to the extreme. On the city wall, 2 figures wearing armor stood with their hands behind their backs, with anxious looks on their faces. One of these 2 people is the commander-in-chief of Wuzhen and the other is the general of Dayo. They are the top generals of the 2 countries' coalition forces. Commander Wuzhen looked into the distance and said in a deep voice, "There must be a powerful person in Xiaoan's army. This person is very cunning in his tactics. I have fallen into his hands several times." He looked at the person next to him and asked, "Wuzhen has already tried his best. Can you, Dayo, still muster another 50,000 troops?" General Dayo shook his head and said, "The young men in the city have never been on the battlefield. They are just pushing out to die. However, they can make up 20,000 slaves. I will write a letter to ask the king for instructions." Before he finished speaking, a light horse suddenly came galloping outside the city. General Dayu recognized that this person was the leader of the guard beside the king. A trace of doubt appeared on his face. He said to the officers and soldiers on the wall, Let go, he comes up. The leader of the guard around the king has the responsibility of guarding the palace and would not leave the capital easily. How could he come to Wuzan? Some officers and soldiers put down the hanging basket and hung the guard leader up the city wall. Before General Dayo could ask questions, the guard leader knelt on one knee in front of him and said sadly and angrily, "General, Dayo city has been destroyed and the king has been captured, please go back quickly for rescue." "What?" General Oyo's expression changed drastically. He grabbed him by the collar and said angrily, "How is this possible?" The guard leader showed a dejected look on his face and said, "After the defeats of Khotan and Gumo, the defensive strength of Dayo city was greatly weakened. The Western region allies took this opportunity to collude with the slaves in the city and caught us off guard." Trash. The general's face showed extreme anger. There were 200,000 people in Dayo city. Even if he led an army of 100,000 people, it would not be easy to invade the city. The Western region allies had just been established, and they probably could not muster 20,000 troops in total, but they were able to capture Dayo city. In this way, wouldn't the army be deprived of supplies and become homeless? General Atsuki almost subconsciously ordered the deputy general behind him, "Reorganize your troops immediately and follow me back to kill these traitors." Commander Wuzun beside him was also shocked when he heard that Dayo city was captured. However, when he heard that Dayo was about to withdraw his troops and return to defense, his face became fierce and he said loudly, "General, don't be impulsive, this matter needs long-term consideration. Only if Dayo and Wuzun join forces can they be able to tie with Zioan, and in the past month, they have shown signs of decline. If Dayo withdraws his troops at this time, Wuzun will be conquered by Zioan in less than 3 days. Next country." Similarly, Dayo, who has lost Wuzun's support, will soon become Zioan's next target. General Atsuki had been blinded by anger just now. After being reminded, he immediately realized that even if Atsuki city was destroyed, they could not go back to rescue him at this time. He felt extremely aggrieved and punched the city wall hard. Only after Zioan is solved can they return to the city. However, defeating Zioan is not easy. Judging from the recent battles, the defeat of the coalition forces is nothing more than a matter of time. The morale of the allied forces of the two countries was even lower due to the capture of Atsuki city. An atmosphere of panic spread among the Atsuki army. Within a day, hundreds of deserters appeared. While the commanders of the two armies were having a headache over these matters, the heads of the Western region allies, invited by Tangning, also came to Zioan city. Even though they had received the news early, after entering Zioan city and seeing this fact with their own eyes, these kings still looked in disbelief. The Lord of Kayamo looked at Tangning and murmured in a low voice, "I really can't believe it. It turns out that the father of Lord Shao is the Lord of Zioan." Tangning just smiled slightly. Not to mention that they couldn't believe it, even Tangning himself took a long time to accept this reality. Tangning looked at everyone and said, "I asked you all to come here today because I have an important matter to discuss." As soon as he finished speaking, the faces of the heads of the countries immediately became solemn. Not to mention that he was the chief monarch of the Western Region Alliance, just his identity as the ruler of Zioan, these people had to take his words seriously. What's more, he was already the ruler of Zioan, and he was still so polite to the heads of small countries like them. Don't you see that a small envoy from Dayo could boss them around? Tangning's words have given them enough face. Tangning looked at them and continued, "I am already the ruler of Zioan, so it is not good for me to serve as the chief monarch of the alliance. After today, Wu Tanzi will leave the alliance and move into Zioan city. You should re-elect a chief monarch to lead the alliance." Tangning's words were not unexpected by everyone. Zioan has more than 100,000 soldiers and hundreds of thousands of civilians, so naturally she looks down on the allies with only 20,000 people. However, These kings also know that although the Western region's allies are composed of 18 countries, Zioan and Wuzun Dadio can easily crush them. Even though they have occupied Dadio city now, once Dadio's army returns, their fate will be miserable. Only with Zioan's protection can they continue to survive in the desert. The king of Kayamo thought about it, and a firm look flashed in his eyes, and he quickly made a decision. He knelt on one knee, looked at Tangning, and said loudly, "Kayamo is willing to follow Zioan and the king, and I hope the king will take us in." The kings of the other countries looked at each other for a few times, and saw something similar in each other's eyes. The leader of Huhu country knelt down second and said, "Huhu is also willing to follow the leader, please take him in." The leader of G country was the third to react, and immediately knelt beside the leader of Huhu country, and couldn't wait to say, "G country is also willing to follow." The leaders of the Western region allies have figured out the crux of this, knowing that only by following Zioan can the continuation of their countries be guaranteed. One by one, they knelt on one knee and begged earnestly. Although Tangning couldn't understand what most of them said, judging from their expressions, they should be expressing the same meaning. In fact, after controlling Zioan, he would no longer need the power of the Western region allies. He originally wanted to let them govern the allies themselves, but the scene in front of him was beyond his expectations. Zioan city is very large. Countries like Wuzun and Dadio have a population that is not too small or too large. A large city is enough to accommodate the entire population. Although Zioan city is not as prosperous as the capital, it is several times larger than the capital in terms of area. It doesn't make much difference if there are 20,000 more or less people. Accepting the Western region's allies will have little impact on Zioan city. He looked at the crowd again, put his hands together, and said, "Everyone, stand up. I agree to your request." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 945. There are more than a dozen small countries in the Western region, with a population of only a few hundred or thousands. Not only do they have to guard against annexation by big powers, but they also have to worry about horse thieves massacring their cities. It is not easy to find a backer who can provide them with protection without annexing them. This chapter was first published on AI.U. Sheng, Novel Network. Please remember the URL. There is no doubt that Zioan will become the absolute overlord of the Western regions in the future. When the time comes, other countries in the Western regions will be conquered by them. How will the allies in the Western regions deal with themselves? The best choice is to be loyal to Zioan before this happens. If they are annexed by Dadio or Wuzun, their country will perish and the people will become slaves. Submitting to Zioan and still keeping the country is the best choice. Tangning asked Mr. Su to set aside an area in the city to accommodate the people of the Western allied countries. As a result, the countries in the Western region, large and small, were either annexed or chose to submit, and the entire Western region completely formed a three-legged alliance. Among them, Zioan is the most powerful, but the combination of Dadio and Wuzun cannot be underestimated. Fortunately, they have occupied Dadio city, leaving Dadio soldiers isolated and helpless. Good news from the battlefield, and more, and more. After Mr. Su made arrangements for accepting the allies, he stood quietly behind Tangning. After a moment, he asked, "I dare to ask the king a question." Mr. Su used to be from Chen State. It is said that his family suffered a disaster. The government not only failed to make decisions for him, but instead protected the powerful squires. He appealed everywhere to no avail, so he came to Zioan in anger. Over the years, he has made great contributions to Zioan, and he has also put himself in danger. He has been undercover with King Kong for many years. After returning this time, he soon took the position of Prime Minister. After Tangning left the Western region, he still needed to take care of it. He smiled and said, "Mr. Su, it doesn't matter. Mr. Su looked at him and was silent for a moment before asking, after unifying the western regions, how does the king plan to treat Chenguo? When he asked this question, he did not mention Dayo and Wuzun, as if in his eyes, Zioan unified the western region, and these two could not hinder Zioan's unification. Today, Zioan is hostile to the Chen state. The Chen state has deployed an army of 400,000 troops on the border to guard against Zioan's invasion. Mr. Su's words made Tang Ning fall into deep thought. He thought for a while and said, war is the original sin. Zioan soldiers also have parents and family members. Don't ignore their lives for the sake of family grudges. There were some unresolved grievances between the Tang family, Emperor Chen, and the imperial court of Chen state, but the culprits of this incident were all laid to rest, and their family of three was reunited. Tang Ning has always had a special feeling for Chenguo. He could not do anything to plunge millions of people into war for reasons that were not life and death grudges. Mr. Su already got the answer to this question, nodded and said, I understand. Then, he bowed to Tang Ning and said, having a ruler in Zioan is a blessing to the people. Wuzun City. Ever since the news came that Dayo City had been captured, the entire Wuzun kingdom fell into a huge panic. Dayo's army was homeless, and Wuzun became the last place in the desert that was not conquered by Zioan. However, they seemed to be able to see it on the day Wuzun City was captured. In the past few days, there have been more than 10 wars, large and small, but the two countries' coalition forces have not won a single victory. Until now, the army can only stay in the city and dare not go out to fight. Under the heavy pressure of Zioan's army, Wuzun has become an isolated city. The people in the city and the allied forces of the two countries can only huddle in the city. Outsiders cannot enter the city, and they cannot leave the city. Zioan has a steady stream of backup, but the food in Wuzun City decreases every time it is consumed. Today's Wuzun City not only has to feed hundreds of thousands of people, but also is responsible for the food and grass for the two countries' coalition forces. For a big city with rich grain reserves, although it can afford it in the short term, in the long run, Wuzun will definitely, faced with the embarrassing situation of running out of food. In the city, in the Dayo military camp, a soldier looked at the gruel in the bowl and cursed angrily, why is it less than yesterday? Several companions around him shook their heads and sighed in their hearts. These Dayo troops have become homeless. Dayo City has been captured. They have lost their food and reinforcements and can only rely on Wuzun's temporary relief. However, for them who have to fight on the battlefield often, how can this be a little bit of gruel? In the military camp, in the commander's tent, several generals surrounded Commander Dayo, with angry looks on their faces. One of them slammed the bowl on the table and said, General, look at this, Wuzun treats friendly troops like this. Yes, the food they delivered today is 30% less than yesterday. General Dayo looked calm and said, General, I know, you can go down first. After everyone left, a look of helplessness appeared on his face. The two armies united to fight against Zioan, both prospered and suffered losses. It stands to reason that Wuzun would never dare to do anything bad to its friendly forces, but with Wuzun's current situation, they don't even have enough food themselves, and they have to take care of the rest of the world. The U army has already done its utmost to be benevolent and righteous. Since learning about the capture of Itsuki City, several riots have occurred in Itsuki's army every day. The soldiers and their families here are all in Dayo City. No one knows what the situation is in the city at this moment. This made no one interested in fighting at all. Even he was worried about his wife and children who were far away in Dayo City. But Zioan's attacks became more and more fierce. While they were tired of parrying, fear finally began to rise in their hearts. This feeling will appear in anyone's heart when facing an opponent that is simply invincible. He sat in the tent for a whole day, and when he stood up, he finally seemed to have made a decision. He walked to the door and told the two guards, Gather all the generals to come to the commander's tent to discuss matters. Another month has passed in the blink of an eye, and it is now early November, and there are still 2 months until the end of the year. Yesterday, good news came again from Lao Zheng. Xiaowen had completely suppressed Dadio and Wuzun on the battlefield, and the elders who had sneaked into Wuzun city also successfully fought with Xiaowen in Wuzun. The undercover agents got in touch, and with their cooperation, Wuzun would be taken down within half a month as expected. Tang Ning calculated the time. If they could capture Wuzun in half a month, and then use another half month to discuss with the ministers the policies and guidelines after the reunification of the western regions, it would be possible to return to Guizhou to celebrate the reunion year. Tang Yaoyao looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Are you going back soon?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "We can return to Guizhou in a month at most." Tang Yaoyao just hummed and said nothing more. She didn't seem to be in a high mood. Xiao Xiao on the side also looked a little uninterested. Tang Ning was a little surprised. The two of them had been criticizing the weather in the western region for a long time and were unwilling to stay here longer. However, after hearing the news about returning home, they did not show any happy emotions. He looked at Tang Yaoyao and Xiao Xiao in confusion and asked, "What's wrong? Don't you want to go back?" Naturally, Tang Yaoyao couldn't tell him that she was disappointed because after returning to Guizhou, she could no longer live in a world with Tang Ning. However, thinking of the fact that she had occupied Tang Ning for a long time these days, the thought that had just arisen in her heart arose. Feeling guilty, he quickly regained his composure, put a smile on his face, and said, I've wanted to take care of them for a long time." Xiao Xiao looked up at Tang Ning and asked, "Brother, are there a lot of bugs in Guizhou?" Tang Ning couldn't help but laugh. She never imagined that she, who was already considered the best in the world in martial arts, would be afraid of those bugs. But it's normal for a girl to be afraid of these things. No wonder she has never been willing to learn voodoo. It turns out that the crux is here. Tang Ning touched her head and said, "When you go to Guizhou province, ask the elders to sprinkle some insect-repellent medicine around your room, so that no insects will come near." Xiao Xiao nodded, still feeling a little down. Tang Ning was about to comfort her again when Mr. Su knocked on the door, walked to the yard, looked at him and said, "Your Majesty, the big moon has fallen." First release of this chapter like Have Voice Novel Network, please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 946. Xiaowen divided its troops to encircle Wuzun city from the east and west. The coalition forces of Wuzun and Dadio defended the east and west gates respectively. Last night, Dadio's army opened the west gate and announced their surrender to Xiaowen. Dadio's generals were also quite principled in their work. After they left the city, they had the gates closed and did not bring Xiaowen's army into Wuzun city. Xiaowen's generals accepted Dadio's surrender and confiscated their weapons, but did not form a coalition with them. Instead, they allocated a part of their forces to guard these surrendered soldiers, and the rest continued to besiege Dadio's city. Tang Ning was not worried that this was Dadio's plan. With Lao Zheng there, if they surrendered in a false way, they would only pay a heavier price. After Dadio surrendered, Xiaowen's pressure was immediately reduced by half, and in contrast, Wuzun had to face Xiaowen's army independently. Tang Ning looked at Mr. Su and asked, "What did General Zheng say?" When General Zheng was mentioned, even Mr. Su showed a hint of admiration on his face. Before he went to the military camp, Xiaowen could only tie with Dadio Wuzun at most, and after he took over as the commander, Xiaowen had never lost a battle. It can be said that the reason why Dadio surrendered so quickly was largely because the Xiaowen army he led was invincible and undefeated. He looked at Tang Ning and said, "General Zheng said that Wuzun can be taken down within half a month." On such matters, old Zheng never made big statements, and Tang Ning only had to wait for his good news here. The news of Dadio's surrender soon spread throughout Xiaowen city. This was another great victory for Zioan. The people cheered and sang and danced, and the small countries that surrendered earlier were also secretly glad in their hearts that they made such a wise decision in advance. Compared with the excitement of the people of Zioan, the hearts of Wuzan, from officials to the people, seemed to be pressed by a huge stone, as if a dark cloud was pressing down on their heads. Even if they joined forces with Dayo, they were still no match for Zioan. Now that they had lost Dayo, their strength was only half of what it was before, while their opponents had a powerful helper. With such a huge gap in strength, it was only a matter of time before Wuzan city was broken. In the imperial city, the hall where the ministers usually held meetings was very quiet at this moment. None of the king and ministers spoke. Everyone looked serious and could not hide their sadness. They were Wuzan people, and they were proud of being a superpower, but no matter how proud they had to admit that Wuzan had reached a moment of life and death. The king of Wuzan sat on top, his face pale and bloodless, and his straight spine bent down. As the king, he had no choice but to take responsibility for Wuzan's current situation. Now the Zioan army was eyeing them outside the city, and they didn't have much time left. An old minister trembled and stepped forward, saying hoarsely, "Lord, we must make a decision quickly." Another young minister raised his head with difficulty and said, "Zioan is strong, we are no match for them. Now they have the help of Dayo and the western region's allies. If Wuzan continues to resist, it will only increase unnecessary casualties. We. There was extreme repression in his voice. After a long time, he exhaled a breath of turbid air and gritted his teeth and said, "Let's surrender." After saying this, his face suddenly relaxed and said, "I have inquired about, surrender to Zioan, and can keep the name of the country. They only want military power and will not interfere in other countries' internal affairs." "Asshole," an old man pointed at him, his fingers trembling, his eyes bulging, and said angrily, "How can we, the soldiers of Wuzan, be cowardly and afraid of death? How can we surrender? Without military power, the power of life and death will be held by others. What's the difference between that and the destruction of the country? How can you say such a foolish thing?" The old ministers rebuked him one after another, and another part of the people in the hall bowed their heads deeply, neither agreeing nor opposing. But in such a situation, if there is no fierce opposition, it means agreement. The young official was rebuked by everyone, his face flushed, and he suddenly said in anger, "If you want to die, are you going to drag my 200,000 people of Wuzan with you?" The people were questioned by this, and their bodies stood still, and they didn't speak for a while. Enough at this moment, a hoarse voice came from above. Everyone looked at the king, who stood up slowly, as if he had aged a lot in an instant, and murmured, "King." The king of Wuzan waved his hand, and his eyes swept around the hall for a long time. A trace of reluctance appeared on his face, and he said word by word, "Let's surrender." The time to capture Wuzan was more than 10 days earlier than what Lao Zheng said, because on the third day after Dayo surrendered, Wuzan opened the country and announced its submission to Zioan. Tang Ning thought they would hold on for a while longer. After all, Wuzan was also a superpower with a population of hundreds of thousands. Unexpectedly, they saw the general situation so quickly and made a choice. Wuzan's surrender indicated that Zioan had finally achieved the unification of the western regions. Over the years, many countries have been annexed by the three major countries. Now that Dayo and Wuzan have surrendered, Zioan can finally gather the power of the entire western regions together and mobilize more than 400,000 troops at any time. Although Dayo, Wuzan, and the allied countries in the western regions retain their national names and political powers, the royal families of each country no longer controlled the military power and only retained a small number of guard forces. The rest of the soldiers and generals were reorganized and placed under Zioan's command. Tang Ning spent a full 10 days discussing with Mr. Su the policy of governing the western regions and the future path of the western regions. First of all, of course, it is the attitude towards the countries in the western regions. This can continue the national law before Zioan. There are big and small countries, but the citizens of each country are not high or low. The people of Wuzun and Dayu are not more noble than Huhu and Cheshi. Even the original people of Zioan are equal to them in status. Secondly, it is necessary to open up trade routes in the western regions, create favorable conditions for merchants from various countries, and promote the development of commerce in the western regions. In order to accomplish this, the horse thieves scattered in the western regions must be eliminated or subdued. Without a safe environment, which merchant can safely travel in the desert? In addition, there are other detailed and tedious things. Tang Ning just pointed out the general direction for them and handed them all to Mr. Su for implementation. After completing these things, he and Tang Yao and his party left Zioan and embarked on the return journey. At the same time, the news that Zioan conquered Daewuzun and unified the western regions quickly spread to Chen State, Chu State, Grassland, and Kiandi. The emergence of a unified country in the western regions directly changed the situation on this continent. Wherever the news was heard, a storm of shocking storms was set off. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 947. Chenguo. It is already the 12th lunar month of the 4th year of Dingyuan, and in 1 month it will be the 5th year of Dingyuan. This is the 5th year since Chenguo changed his country to Yuan dynasty, and it is also the most unstable year. In the past year, although the people of Chen State still lived and worked in peace and contentment without any disturbances in their lives, several major events actually happened in the imperial court. The two princes rebelled one after another, and the emperor's critical illness almost completely overturned the situation in the court. Fortunately, there was a Dingai needle in the capital. No matter how critical the situation was, it could be calmed down with his action. Right Chancellor Tang Ning has been away from Beijing for half a year. No one knows where he has gone, just like a year ago when he quietly went to Guizhou. That time, he quietly quelled the rebellion in Guizhou and eliminated a major hidden danger in the south of the Yangtze River for Chen State. When Tang Ning was in Beijing, he was a virtuous minister who governed the country. Corrupt officials were invisible to him. When he was not in Beijing, he did bigger and more valuable things, quelling the rebellion in the south of the Yangtze River, pacifying the situation in the northwest, and pacifying the rebellion in Guizhou. Each of these was a great achievement. His whereabouts are a mystery to the people and even to most officials in the court. In the past 6 months, many people have been speculating whether he went to the western regions. After all, the Chen state is now stable in all directions. Only in the western region, there are still great hidden dangers. The right prime minister has always gone wherever there is a threat to the Chen state. In the past 6 months, the western region has become increasingly chaotic, which is the same as right minister Tang Ning's style of doing things. Although his name is Tang Ning, there is no peace wherever he is. The royal palace, in the royal garden. Snow had just fallen in the capital a few days ago, and the snow in the imperial garden had not yet melted, and there was still a hint of coldness in the air. Chen Huang followed Wei Jian, walking slowly in the imperial garden. His complexion looks much better than it did half a year ago. Under the care of the imperial physician, although his body has not fully recovered, it has returned to 60 to 70% of its previous appearance. He wandered around the imperial garden for a quarter of an hour, and suddenly asked, "How is the situation in the western region?" In the past 6 months, due to physical reasons, he has no longer personally dealt with political affairs, but he still pays special attention to some major issues related to the state. Wei Jian stopped and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, the western region has become more chaotic in the past 6 months. Dayo and Wuzun have joined forces and gathered an army of 200,000. It seems that they want to get rid of Zioan. Just a month ago news came that in order to fight against the horse thieves, those small countries formed another Western region ally. Emperor Chen didn't take the so-called allies of the Western region seriously, because he knew that they were just in name. Those so-called countries were not even comparable to a village in Chen state. On the contrary, it was the news that Dayo and Wuzun had joined forces that caught his attention. Emperor Chen thought for a moment and said, I just thought about it not long ago. If we can unite Dayo and Wuzun, plus our Chen kingdom's 400,000 troops, to destroy Zioan and take the head of the leader of Zioan, wouldn't it be like picking something out of a bag? Wei Jian thought for a while and said, Your Majesty, the situation in the western region is complicated and the area is huge. If our army goes deep into the western region, the supply of food and grass will be a big problem. Fighting in the western region will not be beneficial to us. That's why we have to join forces with them. Emperor Chen thought for a long time, and then he made a decision in his heart, and ordered, summon the king and several ministers to the palace. This is a rare opportunity for us. After Wei Jian gave the order, Emperor Chen remembered something and asked again, has Tang Ning returned to the capital? Whenever something big like this happens, he subconsciously wants to discuss it with Tang Ning. Unfortunately, he has been away from Beijing for half a year. Wei Jian shook his head and said, not yet. If Mr. Tang returns to Beijing, he will definitely enter the palace to see His Majesty as soon as possible. Emperor Chen snorted coldly and said, don't think that I don't understand him. He didn't enter the palace just to see me. Wei Jian smiled coquettishly and made no further remarks. This bastard boy, in the past 6 months, I don't know where to go to be romantic and happy. Chen Huang said with a look of regret on his face, if I had known, I would have let him go to the western regions. He is just a troublemaker, staring at whoever falls in love with him will be in trouble. If he goes to Zioan to cause trouble, maybe our Chen country will no longer have the big threat of Zioan. The two of them wandered around the imperial garden for a while, and then Emperor Chen was ready to return to his palace. At this moment, a young eunuch hurriedly walked in and said, Your Majesty, Mr. Liu, the Minister of War, wants to see you, saying that he has something very important to see Your Majesty. In the past 6 months, Emperor Chen had left all government affairs to Shaanxi province, knowing that his illness was not a serious matter and officials would not bother him. Emperor Chen's brows furrowed slightly. It must not be a trivial matter for Lu Ding, the Minister of War, to rush into the palace. There was a serious look on his face and he said, let him raise the temple. A moment later, Lu Ding stepped into the Yang temple and bowed, I see Your Majesty. Lu Iking is excused. Chen Huang waved his hand. Seeing a trace of anxiety on his face, he couldn't help but feel an unpleasant feeling in his heart, and asked, what happened? Lu Ding raised his head and said slowly, Your Majesty, there is a report from the front. Dayo, Wuzun was defeated by Zioan, and has now surrendered to Zioan. Zioan has unified the western region. Chen Wang's body shook, and his face suddenly turned pale. Today, Zioan in the western region is almost the only thorn in his heart. He originally planned to send troops to help Dayo and Wuzun after this year. Unexpectedly, the scene he least wanted to see happened. Zioan unifies the western region, and what the Chen kingdom will face on the border is never peace. His face was extremely ugly, and he whispered, go ahead and let the morning court resume tomorrow, and all the ministers must not be absent. Chu State, Kyoto. The news of the unification of the western regions by Zioan spread to Chu State today. Although Zioan's unification of the western regions can be regarded as a great event, there is still a Chen state between Chu and Zioan. No matter how powerful Zioan is, it cannot threaten Chu. Unless they destroy the Chen state, of course, this is impossible. Although Zioan is powerful and can pose a great threat to the Chen state's border, if they push the Chen state, they can defeat the Chen state in a very short time. Raising an army with a population larger than that of the western regions, but if they really had to use this method to fight Zhaoan to the death, Chen Guo would have to pay an unimaginable price. After all, Zhaoan was too far away from Chu state, so although this incident also caused waves in the court, its impact was extremely limited. For the Chu state, the continuation of the royal family was much more important than Zhaoan's affairs. The current emperor of Chu state has only one queen and only one princess. Although this princess's talents are not inferior to those of the previous emperors, she is a woman and cannot inherit the throne of emperor. The queen is sterile. This is no secret in the court, but how can the emperor be childless? Although the current emperor is in his prime, he will one day grow old. At that time, who should inherit the throne? A minister once suggested that His Majesty should have more concubines and give birth to more princes for the sake of the overall situation. However, this suggestion was rejected by His Majesty in person. Not only that, he also specially rewarded several beauties to marry these officials as concubines. Even though some of these officials married the daughters of wealthy families and never took concubines in their lives, they could not disobey the emperor's orders and could only follow the holy orders. Later, these officials did not go to court for several days. When they appeared in court again, blood stains could still be seen on their faces. Since then, no one has mentioned it again. If your Majesty is unwilling to accept a concubine, they cannot force him. When the time comes, it would be a good idea to adopt an heir apparent from the kings. Changning Princess Mansion. Although Li Tianlan is a princess, she has taken over the government affairs a few years ago and has made many political achievements in the past few years. No one in the court dares to look down on her because she is a woman. At this time, she was sitting at the table in the study room of the princess mansion, with a secret note on the table. The content on the secret note is very important. Zhaoan unified the western regions and greatly changed the pattern of the mainland. Although there is still a Chen state between Chu and Zhaoan, this cannot be completely ignored. However, after the woman at the table read the secret note with an expressionless face, she completely forgot about it. Thinking of her 3-year appointment with someone, which had already exceeded half a year, a hint of sullenness appeared on her cold face, and she whispered, "Breaking promises." Snapped. The pen holder in her hand broke into 2 pieces because she held it too hard. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 948. Zhaoan unified the western regions, making the whole of Chen state feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Based on Zhaoan's attitude towards Chen state in recent years, I am afraid that when they completely control the western regions, Chen state will have another formidable enemy like the grassland before. Because of this incident, Chen state stopped holding the morning court for half a year. When it was held again, the court officials decided to wait and see what would happen. Fighting in the western regions was very disadvantageous to the soldiers of Chen state. They did not intend to send troops rashly, but strengthened the defense of Shazhu and other places, and closely monitored every move in the western regions. This news did not cause much impact in Chu state. The court officials of Chu state were recently selecting children with royal blood, choosing the best one, and setting him as the crown prince of Chu state. Although this matter is still far away, they do not intend to learn from Chen state. If the crown prince is determined earlier, the country will be less turbulent. In dealing with the crown prince, Chen state set a successful failure example for them. The grassland received this news earlier than the Chu state. After all, they also bordered the western regions and were closer to the western regions than the Chu state. However, this important news did not cause much waves in the Wanyan tribe. In the Khan's tent, a woman wearing Han clothes was lying on the bedboard, with her legs raised and swinging unconsciously. As she swayed, she counted her fingers and murmured, 3 years have passed, 1.5 years have passed, and there is still 1.5 years. Aina walked in from outside and said, Khan, there is movement from Hyman again. Wanyanyan ignored her words and asked with a red face, Aina, do you think he will come to me earlier? Aina showed helplessness on her face. She didn't know what was so good about that man. Since he left, the Khan has been absent-minded all day long. Thinking of this, she was a little angry. The dignified Wanyan Khan, the master of the grassland, was like a little woman all day long. How could it be? She frowned and said, in my opinion, he just wanted to leave and was perfunctory to the Khan. He dares. Wanyanyan got up from the bed, gritted her teeth, and said, if he dares not to come, I will send troops to Chen State to take him back. Chu. After more than a month of travel, Tang Ning, who had just entered Guizhou, suddenly sneezed. It was still cooler in the mountains. He rubbed his nose. These days, he was used to basking in the sun in the western regions, and for a while he was a little uncomfortable with the weather in Guizhou. In any case, his mother and Tang Shui were fine, and his worries were finally resolved. As for becoming the Lord of Xiaoan and the Lord of the Western regions inexplicably, it was purely an unexpected gain. He should have accompanied the ladies well, but this time he returned to Guizhou, he couldn't stay for long. Because he had been delayed in the Western regions for too long, the 3-year period with Li Tianlan had expired for half a year. If he delayed any further, when he arrived in Chu and saw her, something bad might happen. After all, that lady's temperament is not like Xiru and Xiaoi, and she is even more difficult to serve than Tang Yejing. This time, Tang Ning broke his promise first. Whenever he thought of this trip to Chu, he felt a little overwhelmed. Fortunately, before he left the western regions, he asked Mr. Su to make some arrangements, and maybe he could save some of the situation in front of her at that time. Compared with half a year ago, Candy has changed a lot. The last time he left Candy, Tang Ning left 10 million taels of silver to transform the future living environment. The elder did not live up to his expectations. It took only more than half a year to build a city in the mountains here, and opened up the trade route with the surrounding prefectures. The prosperity of Candy is increasing day by day. However, in Tang Ning's eyes, these are not important. He only has a few figures in front of him who are looking forward to it. Looking at them from a distance, Tang Ning's heart surged with a warm current, and he walked over quickly. In the past 6 months, they have no fixed place to live. They just wrote a letter back every once in a while to report their safety, and they don't know what happened in Candy. Husband. Brother Xiaoning. Zhonggai ran over and threw herself into his arms. Su Ryu and Su Mei stood behind her, looking at them with a smile. Soon, Tang Ning felt her shoulders wet, followed by Xiaoi's choked voice. I heard that the western regions are in chaos these days. Xiaoan has unified the western regions. I am very worried about you. Tang Ning held her waist and comforted her softly, it's okay, it's okay. As if she realized that everyone was watching them, Zhonggai finally came to her senses, let go of Tang Ning, wiped her tears, looked at Tang Ning again, and said with a sad tone, I have good news to tell my husband. In fact, without her saying anything, Tang Ning had already noticed that Su Ryu, who was standing beside her, had a slightly protruding belly. As if a flash of lightning flashed through his mind, Tang Ning stared at her in a daze and asked, Xiao are you pregnant? Su Ryu blushed and nodded, her eyes looking even more resentful. She lamented softly, my husband is partial to me. That night, Xiao Ryu and I were clearly. Some wonderful things did happen the night before Tang Ning left them and went to the western regions, but he was always fair to all the women, how could he be partial to them? And the reason why Xiao Ryu was pregnant, could only be attributed to luck. Xiao Ryu's pregnancy was great news for Tang Ning. He didn't want children before because his family was not settled yet. Now the situation is different. Whether it is Candy or the western regions, they are all their territory. Even if he has 10 or 8 children with them, he doesn't have to worry about not being able to protect them. Tang Ning was excited and relieved. This time when he returned to the capital, he was finally able to draw a clear line with King Huai and was as proud as Xiaoju. Tang Ning carefully helped Su Ru back. Zhou Yi's expression was a little resentful, so Tang Ning didn't dare to look at her. In fact, the two of them tend to be conservative and traditional in their hearts. They believe that as a wife, she should take care of her husband and children. They have been married for many years and have no children. They have been anxious in their hearts. On the contrary, Su Mei, although the oldest among them, has a natural fear of having children like Tang Yaoyao. Unable to bear to look at her eyes again, Tang Ning leaned close to Zhou Yi's ear and whispered a few words. She blushed and nodded, and the resentment on her face could no longer be seen. Tang Yaoyao leaned over and asked curiously, "What did you say to Xiao Yi?" Tang Ning looked at her and whispered, "We are planning to have a baby. Do you want to come with us?" Bah, Tang Yaoyao spat secretly and said, "Dream on." Although Tang Yejing entered the house early, she was the last one among the wives to have a real marriage with him. In some aspects, she was naturally more conservative. She could accept the existence of the other wives, but it did not mean that she could accept other things. Tang Ning did not expect that the proud Tang Yejing would be so wronged. After joking, she did not speak again. That night, in Zhou Yi's room. Although they had serious things to do at night, before that, Tang Ning felt that as the eldest wife of the Tang family, it was better to tell her some things as soon as possible. He had just returned and had not figured out how to tell them that he had become the ruler of Xiaoan. He thought for a long time before looking at Zhou Yi and said, "My wife, there is something I want to tell you." Zhou Yi rolled her eyes at him and asked, "Could my husband have found another sister for us in the western regions? How is that possible?" Tang Ning looked at her angrily and said, "Is your husband that kind of person?" He admitted that although he was a little amorous, he was not promiscuous. How could he accept every woman he met? Moreover, Tang Yejing followed him for 12 hours every day on this journey. Even if he had the intention, he would not have the opportunity. But when he said this, he still felt a little guilty. Although he did not have a sister, his sister almost had one. In order to avoid this matter, Tang Shui had already gone to Jiangnan. Zhou Yi looked at him and asked, "What is that matter? It's so mysterious." Tang Ning cleared his throat, looked at her, and said seriously, "Congratulations, my wife, you are going to be the queen." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 949. Zhou Yi was shocked when she heard this and said in panic, "Husband, what are you talking about?" Tang Ning knew that she would react like this and said helplessly, "How could I talk nonsense about such a thing?" Zhou Yi's face turned pale and asked, "Husband, are you going to rebel? But how can this be done? My parents are still in the capital, and how can we explain to Xiao Man?" "What are you thinking about?" Tang Ning tapped her forehead and said, "I'm talking about Xiao Wan's queen." He looked at Zhou Yi and explained, "I am the ruler of Xiao Wan now, so you are naturally the queen." The western regions had been unified by Xiao Wan, and the ruler of the western regions was the same level as the Emperor Chen and the Emperor Chu. Zhou Yi looked at him in astonishment and murmured, "Husband said, what?" Tang Ning could only tell her in detail what happened in the western regions, because Tang Ning felt that it was better to tell them these things in person, so she didn't say much in the letter. Zhou Yi only knew that Tang Yu and Tang Shui were fine, but didn't know more. "My husband, you are saying that you not only found your mother and father during this trip to the western regions, but your father is the ruler of Xiaoan. He, a prime minister of the state of Chen, became the ruler of the western regions inexplicably. Although this matter sounds a bit unbelievable, it is true." Tang Ning nodded and said, "When I learned about this matter, I was also surprised." Later, My parents went to Jiangnan and left the mess of the western regions to me. We should have returned to Guizhou a long time ago, but for the stability of Xiaoan, it took more than a month to unify the western regions before returning. Zhongyi slowly sat down on the bed, holding her forehead, closed her eyes, and said, "My husband, please let me calm down for a while." A few years ago, she was just the daughter of a county magistrate who was forced to marry by the governor and could not protect herself. Over the years, her imperial edict rank has been continuously improved. Now she is going to become the mother of a country. She has never thought about this before, and it is difficult for her to accept it for a while. After a long time, she took a deep breath, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "What are your plans next, husband?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "After Xiao Ru gives birth, I want to go to Chu State first to pick up Lan Lan, and then go to the capital to pick up my father-in-law and mother-in-law. My father-in-law likes to be an official, so it's the same if he goes to the western regions to be an official. Now that the western regions have just been unified, they are in need of experienced officials like him." Tang Ning originally planned to accompany them through the 15th day of the lunar month and then leave for Chu State. However, now that Xiao Ru is pregnant, he certainly doesn't feel at ease leaving at this time, so he stays here for a few more months until she gives birth. Zhongyi held his shoulders and said nervously, "But I don't know anything and can't be a good queen. It's better to let Sister Su." Tang Ning gently pressed her lips with her index finger and said softly, "You are the eldest wife of the Tang family. Who else can be the queen except you?" Zhongyi lowered her head and said, but I don't have a child. Will the ministers?" Tang Ning extinguished the candle with a palm wind and said, "Let's give birth now. Life in Guizhou is much better than in the western regions. There is no wind and sand in the sky, no horse thieves, and no need to worry about state affairs. What Tang Ning has to do every day is to accompany the ladies at home and cook nutritious meals for Xiaoru. Pregnant women should pay great attention to nutrition. Tang Ning himself is also half a doctor. Although his medical skills are not very good, he has a deep attainment in health preservation. The black chicken soup is here." He brought the freshly cooked black chicken soup and fed it to Xiaoru himself. After he finished drinking it, he saw Zhonggai's eyes and immediately served her a bowl. He put the spoon to her mouth and said with a smile, "Queen, please try it too. I spent a lot of time on this soup. You are so talkative." Zhonggai rolled her eyes at him and drank the soup he fed her. But the next moment, her face turned pale and she vomited it all out. Tang Ning looked at her and smiled bitterly. It shouldn't be so bad. He was still very confident in his cooking skills. Besides, Xiaoru also praised the soup just now. Tang Ning saw that she was vomiting a lot, so he hurriedly supported her and asked with concern, "Are you feeling unwell?" Zhonggai nodded and said, "I suddenly feel a little nauseous." Tang Ning looked at Qing'er and said, "Go and ask the doctor." Qing'er responded and ran out in a hurry. A quarter of an hour later, Tang Ning saw the old doctor's fingers withdraw from Zhongyi's wrist, and asked with concern, "Doctor, what's wrong?" The wrinkles on the old doctor's face relaxed, and he smiled and said, "Don't worry, the lady is just pregnant." When he said this, Tang Ning and Zhongyi were stunned. The next moment, Zhongyi held Tang Ning's hand tightly, tears flashed in his eyes, and said emotionally, "Husband." The Tang family had a double happiness. After Tang Ning rewarded the doctor who announced the good news, he began to get busy. Xiao Ru's due date was approaching, and Xiao Yi was also pregnant. This was the wish of both of them for many years. It relieved their worries and also relieved Tang Ning's worries. He immediately wrote a letter to his father-in-law and mother-in-law in the capital, reporting the good news, and asked someone to send it back 800 miles away. 10 days later, he received a reply from the capital. After learning that her daughter was pregnant, my mother-in-law set off for Guizhou and would arrive here in half a month. My father-in-law had to stay in the capital because of his high position and had to deal with all the affairs of the secretariat. Xiru and Xiaoi are both pregnant. Tang Yaoyao follows the wealthy Tang to expand the business of Tang's company in Kandy. Tang Ning rests at Su Mei's place at night. With the saint, the Wangu sect in Kandy has been completely unified and can be regarded as a small country. As the saint of Wangu sect and the leader of Kandy, Su Mei is naturally busier and is not at home most of the time. In addition, Tang Ning has focused most of his energy on Xiru and Xiaoi in the past 2 months, so he has neglected her a little. However, although she is the domineering Su Fox in front of outsiders, she has never complained when she is with him, even if Tang Ning neglects her for other things. Tang Ning looked at the beautiful woman lying beside him, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Su Mei opened her eyes and looked at him, asking, "You've been looking at her for so long, haven't you seen enough?" Tang Ning smiled and said, "The most beautiful woman in the capital, I'm afraid I can never see enough in my lifetime." Su Mei rolled her eyes at him and said, "Save these words to deceive the little girl." She was extremely beautiful, even a roll of the eyes was charming and attractive. Tang Ning looked down at her and asked, then, "Little girl Su Mei, are you willing to be deceived by me?" Su Mei didn't answer, but gave him the answer with her actions. In the early morning, when the first ray of sunlight shone through the window, Tang Ning opened his eyes and looked at the peaceful face beside the pillow. At the same time, a pair of eyes on that flawless face trembled and slowly opened. Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Why do I feel like I've been deceived by you?" Su Mei, who was still not awake, closed her eyes and murmured, "What did I deceive you about?" Tang Ning said, "I asked Xiao Tao, she said that you have never had insomnia in the past 6 months when you slept with her." Su Mei frowned and said, "That's because my insomnia has healed." "When did it heal?" "After I married you." Tang Ning thought about it, looked at her again, and said in surprise, "You weren't pretending before, were you, just to make me sleep with you? It turns out that you had bad intentions towards me since then." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 950. Novel.org, the fastest update of the latest chapters of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. Tang Ning got up an hour later than usual because she had angered the saint lady when she got up in the morning. After a simple wash, she had to prepare nutritious meals for the 2 ladies. The great elder seemed to have something important to discuss with Su Mei, and was waiting outside early in the morning. While Tang Ning was cooking, the two had a long conversation in the study, and did not leave until noon. When they were talking in secret just now, the others had already eaten. Tang Ning saved a portion for her. At this moment, he brought the food to the study, helped her set the dishes, and then sat down opposite her and asked, "What did the elder say to you? I think her face doesn't look good." Su Mei picked up the chopsticks and took a few bites of the food before saying, "There is some trouble in Yunnan. Someone in the court wants to take action against Gizhu." Qian was once the territory of Liang. At that time, Liang had dozens of prefectures including Gizhu and Yunnan. Although the territory was not as large as that of Chen and Chu, its strength should not be underestimated. After the demise of Liang, Gizhu was controlled by the Wangu section. The rebels who destroyed Liang established a new dynasty in Yunnan. Because they were unpopular in the rebellion at that time, there were also a series of legacy problems after re-establishing the regime. In the past 10 years, Yunnan has been in civil strife, and naturally there is no talk of recovering Gizhu. Now that they have not even stabilized Yunnan, how could they suddenly want to attack Gizhu? Tang Ning looked at Su Mei and asked, "Is there anyone stirring up trouble in Yunnan?" "Who else could it be except Master Gongsun?" Su Mei showed a sneer on her face and said, they are still obsessed with the power of the Wangu sect and want to stir up trouble between Yunnan and Guizhou. They want us to help them destroy the regime in Yunnan and restore Daliang. Gong Sunying and Bai Jin really did everything they could to restore Liang. Tang Ning finally settled down in Guizhou. His 2 children will be born this year. He will not watch them stirring up trouble around. If Yunnan and the western regions were not separated by the Xifen Plateau, Tang Ning would have ordered the army to pacify Yunnan first. I will take care of this matter. Su Mei gave him a reassuring look and said, it's not that easy for her to drag us down. Tang Ning never doubted the fighting power of the Wangu section. Although they were not many in number, they were completely at home in this deep mountain. With the favorable factors of the innate environment, they were almost invincible. In order to quell the chaos caused by Yunnan on the border, Su Mei took several elders to Bazhu. Tang Yaoyao was also busy with the affairs of the Chamber of Commerce and rarely went home. Both of them were restless and had great power in their hands. It was impossible for them to be canaries in a cage and stay at home to take care of their husbands and children. What they did were all things they liked, so Tang Ning let them do it. In this way, there were 4 ladies in the family, 2 of whom were pregnant and 2 were away. Tang Ning took care of them during the day and slept alone at night. This was nothing to him. Although Tang Ning was a normal man and could not remain calm, he could control his desires. He was quite interested in her and had asked her twice to serve him, but Tang Ning refused. Although the girl was already in her 20s, in Tang Ning's eyes, she was still the impetuous girl. Whenever he thought of those things, he would feel a little uncomfortable. Zhou Yi gently stroked her still very flat belly and said, Qing'er is a maidservant. Do you think she can marry someone else? Tang Ning said, she is still too young. Zhou Yi shook her head and said, that's what you think. Qing'er is not young anymore. You know, she is only 1 year younger than me. Then, Tang Ning knew that he couldn't use modern thinking to measure certain customs here. After thinking for a while, he said, that depends on Qing'er's willingness. Even if she is a maidservant, we can't force her. Zhou Yi smiled and said, you are so smart, but you can't see through a girl's mind. Qing'er's mind has long been in your mind. In the courtyard, under a lush tree, Qing'er and Qiu'er sat side by side on the swing, swinging from time to time. Qing'er looked up at the sky and murmured, I don't know if the young lady is pregnant with a boy or a girl. My husband is the emperor now. If the young lady gives birth to a boy, he will be the prince in the future. Qiu'er looked at her and joked, then Qing'er will also be a concubine. Qing'er panicked and glared at her, saying, what are you talking about? I'm telling the truth. Qiu'er was glared at by her and said innocently, I heard your young lady talking to my husband yesterday, and he asked you to sleep with him. Qing'er blushed and said quickly, what nonsense are you talking about? Qiu'er sighed, said, but the uncle said you are too young, but the 2 young ladies, when they were younger than us, they had already married him. Qing'er trembled slightly when she heard this, and her face, which was originally a little red, immediately turned a little pale. Qiu'er hugged her shoulders and comforted her, oh, don't think about it, the uncle must like you too. Qing'er sat on the swing, feeling a little depressed, and Qiu'er showed regret on her face. She really shouldn't have brought up this topic just now. At this time, Zhongai walked in from outside, looked at Qing'er, and said, Qing'er, come here. Qing'er immediately jumped off the swing, ran to Zhongai, supported her, and asked, Miss, what's the matter? Zhongai looked at her and whispered a few words in her ear. Qing'er was stunned for a moment, then her face turned red, and she was suddenly at a loss. Zhongai looked at her and said, it doesn't matter. If Qing'er doesn't want to, just pretend that Miss didn't say it. If you have a favorite husband candidate, Miss and son-in-law will make the decision for you. No, no, seeing that Miss misunderstood his meaning, Qing'er almost cried in a hurry. She wiped her tears and said, Qing'er is willing, Qing'er is willing. After finding that the lady had left, Qing'er stood there, as if she was about to cry. Xiu hurried over and asked with concern, "What's wrong, what's wrong, why are you crying?" "It's okay." Qing'er wiped her tears, her face turned red again, and she immediately ran away with her head down. Xiu was stunned by the huge difference between her before and after, and shook her head. "What? It's so weird. Xiao Ru's due date is next month." Tang Ning calculated the time and wrote a letter, planning to have someone send it to the western regions and give it to Mr. Su tomorrow. Although becoming the lord of the western regions was just an unexpected gain during this trip to the western regions, after returning, Tang Ning felt more and more that with this identity, those difficult problems that he had previously considered very difficult were immediately solved. After writing the letter and watching Xiao Ru fall asleep, he returned to his room and prepared to rest. However, he had just taken off his coat when there was a knock at the door. Tang Ning walked to the door, opened it, and saw Qing'er standing outside, wearing a thin dress, her face red from the cold, and it was obvious that she had not been standing here for long. Today, she did not wear a double bun, but tied her hair up, and applied a light makeup on her face. At this moment, looking at the lovely girl in front of him, Tang Ning realized that the little maid had really grown up. "It's cold outside, come in and talk." Tang Ning took her hand and walked into the room, then closed the door. Qing'er twisted her hands together, standing there a little awkwardly, looking down at her toes, whispering, "Master, little, young lady." Xiao Yi had mentioned it to him today, so Tang Ning was naturally prepared. He rubbed his hands to warm them, held her cold face, and asked, "Qing'er, have you really thought it through?" Qing'er looked up at him, her eyes gradually became firm, and she said seriously, "Qing'er likes master." Tang Ning took a deep breath, her expression gradually became serious, and said, "In fact, master has wanted to prove something to Qing'er for a long time." Qing'er looked confused and asked, "What is it?" In the room, the candle light suddenly went out, and above the sky, dark clouds covered the moon. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 951. A few years ago, because of Qing'er's ignorance, Tang Ning was burdened with a stigma that no man could bear. And just yesterday, Tang Ning finally proved to her that not only was she wrong, but she was terribly wrong. Early in the morning, when she heard the noise coming from outside, she opened the door, looked at Qing'er standing at the next door, and asked, "What did you do last night? I went to your room to look for you, but you weren't there." "I'm going to serve the lady," Qing'er replied, and then went back to her room. Xiu had sharp eyes, as if she had discovered something, and immediately said, "Wait a minute." She quickly ran outside, ran to Qing'er, looked her up and down, and asked, "Why is your hair like this?" Both of them used to wear maid hair, but when Qing'er put her hair up, she immediately looked different from before. As for those of them who are maids, there is only one possibility for them to tie their hair in this way. Xiu suddenly lost all sleep, and looked at her with wide eyes, unable to make up her mind. You, and my uncle." Qing'er didn't answer, but a trace of blush appeared on her face, and Xiu instantly confirmed her guess. Madame is pregnant, so as Qing'er's maid, she naturally has to serve her uncle in place of her. For a moment, the way she looked at Qing'er changed immediately. There was joy, shock, and envy in her eyes. Although Tang Yaoyao was busy with the affairs of the Chamber of Commerce, she couldn't wait to come back after hearing the news of Zhongyi's pregnancy. Although she herself has a natural fear of giving birth, this does not prevent her from being happy for her best sister. After staying in Zhongyi's room for a long time, when he returned to his yard, he saw Xiu sitting in front of the stone table, holding her chin in one hand, not knowing what she was thinking, looking very worried. Tang Yaoyao walked over, patted her head and said, "What are you thinking about?" Although Xiu is just a maid, she is also a sister who grew up with her. Xiu'er came back to her senses, stood up immediately, looked at Tang Yao Yao, and asked, "Miss Xiu'er, can I ask you a question?" Inexplicable. Tang Yao Yao glanced at her and said, "What's your question? Just ask it." Xiu'er thought for a while and asked, "Miss, Sister Xiru is about to give birth to a baby, and Sister Xiaoi is also pregnant. When does the Miss plan to have a baby?" Tang Yao Yao's face turned red, she glared at her, and said angrily, "Why do you ask this? They also care about the young lady." Xiu'er sighed and said, "This is something we women will definitely experience. The young lady can't live without having children for the rest of her life." Tang Yao Yao curled her lips and asked, "Why not?" Xiu'er said, "Miss, think about it, that is the continuation of your and my uncle's life. After you have a child, there will be one or two little ones around you and call you mother. They will treat the lady as the closest person. Miss can teach them martial arts and watch them grow up day by day." Tang Yao Yao had a longing expression on her face. Obviously, Xiu'er's words also touched the soft spot in her heart. Although her mother's death due to dystocia left an indelible pain in her heart, her determination to save herself regardless of her own life at that time still makes her feel sad when she thinks about it. Perhaps, when she has a child of her own, she will understand how her mother felt back then. However, when he looked at Xiu'er and saw the expression on her face, a trace of doubt emerged in his heart and asked, "You seem to want me to have a baby?" Xiu'er lowered her head and said, "I also like children very much. When the young lady has a child, Xiu'er can help the young lady take care of him." Tang Yao Yao rolled her eyes at her and said, "You like children so much, why don't you just give birth to them yourself?" Xiu'er said aggrievedly, "Me, who am I going to give birth to?" Tang Yao Yao said, "My uncle, haven't you wanted to have a marriage for a long time?" Xiu'er lowered her head and rubbed the corners of her clothes, and whispered, "Where did you think about it?" Tang Yao Yao asked Tang Ning yesterday if she wanted to take Xiu'er into her house, but Tang Ning decisively changed the subject. Zhongyi must be sincere when he mentions this matter. But if Tang Yejing said these words, Tang Ning would have to be more careful with her. Maybe she would turn her back on him just as he nodded. Tang Ning would never fall for this kind of clumsy fishing trap again. Nowadays, most of his thoughts are on Xiru, who is about to give birth. My mother-in-law has already come to Gizhu. When she came, she brought with her a midwife with rich experience in delivering babies. It is said that she used to deliver babies to the concubines of the imperial palace. In this regard, as someone with experience, she was more thoughtful than Tang Ning thought. The day Tang Ning was looking forward to came as promised. Xiru gave birth to Tang Ning's first daughter on one day in early April. Mother and daughter were safe. The experienced midwife was retained by Tang Ning because of her good performance. She was originally unwilling to stay in Gizhu province. After seeing the money Tang Ning offered her, she said that all future midwives would be covered by her. On her. The swaddled baby fell asleep next to Xiru. Tang Ning walked to the bedside, stroked a stray hair on her temples, held her hand and said, "Thank you for your hard work, Xiru." It's not hard. Although Suaryu's face was pale, her eyes were filled with happiness. She looked at Tang Ning, her beautiful eyebrows arched, and murmured, "Brother Ning, we have our own daughter. I'm not dreaming bar." She looked at Tang Ning with a dazed look in her eyes. The one who grew up with her, the one she called Little Ning and Little Ning all the time, the one she had promised to grow old with but almost lost, eventually became her husband, and together they gave birth to their flesh and blood. Tang Ning held her in his arms and whispered, "Silly girl, how could this be a dream?" He hugged her tightly and kissed her forehead gently. Among the most important women in his life, the one he owed the most to was Xiru. If he hadn't appeared, the little Ning brother she was talking about should be her little Ning brother alone, a little Ning brother who didn't need to be shared with anyone. However, even so, in the past few years, From Lingzhou to the capital, from the capital to Guizhou, even though she and Tang Ning were always apart and there were more sisters in the family, she always stood silently beside Tang Ning, treating him as her everything as always. Tang Ning patted her hands and said, "I'll go cook for you. This month, I will definitely make you and my baby daughter plump and white." As soon as the eldest daughter of the Tang family was born, she became the apple of everyone's eye. Even Su Mei rushed home and gave her a gift in person. Tang Ning did not inform Jiangnan of the news that Xiru and Xiaoi were pregnant. He knew that with his mother's temper, she would definitely rush back, but he thought that it would be better for the two of them to spend some time in their own world first. Time flew to May. Under Tang Ning's careful care, Su Ru recovered very well, and even her figure was a little plumper than before. Women always pay special attention to their figures, even Xiru, who has a soft personality, is no exception. Even though Tang Ning told her again and again that she looked better this way, and that she had more mature charm than before, she still followed Xiao Xiao to practice martial arts every day, determined to return to her previous appearance. Tang Ning looked at the two people in the yard, shook her head helplessly and smiled, and suddenly realized something, looked at Qing beside her, and asked, "Qing what day is today?" Qing counted on her fingers and said, "Son-in-law, today is the 9th day of the 5th month." Tang Ning felt a chill in his body for some reason, and finally realized what the important thing he had ignored these days was. At this time, in the distant Chu state, a woman swung a sword to cut a small tree as thick as her arm in half, and said with a frosty face, "It's been a year."